Hi, Kristen Atchison here, and we are still talking about the science of psychology. We are now talking about research ethics. So, today we're going to talk about two kinds of research ethics. We're going to talk about how we protect research with animals, we protect the animals in that research, and how we, in research with humans, protect humans. So, first, we're going to talk about animals. So, animal research has really benefited humans hugely. But really, only about 5% of researchers actually use animal research. So, we talk a lot about the rat studies and the mice studies, and they are a big part of research and they are a big part of psychological research, but it's not the majority of it in psychology. When we do use animals in research, it's about rats and mice are used about 90% of the time. And we do have standards of care for these animals. So we have to make sure that their housing is safe and healthy, that their feeding is safe and healthy, and that we're making sure we're taking care of their physical and psychological well-being. So we're trying to protect the rights of these animals while still using them to benefit human understanding. So we're going to talk about two different organizations that really do some work on protecting the rights of animals in research. The first is the British Psychological Society, and they require that animals be housed under reasonably natural living conditions, and that social animals are provided with companions. So this would not be allowing monkeys and other social animals to be allowed to, or other primates, to be living in isolation. We know that solitary confinement is bad for humans because we're social creatures, and so we know that it's bad for animals when they're in isolation as well. So the British Psychological Society requires that. The American Psychological Society, or Association, I'm sorry, the APA, which we've talked about already and we will continue to talk about, requires researchers to make sure we ensure comfort, health, and humane treatment of animals, and also to minimize infection, illness, and pain. Now, there are organizations within universities and other research institutions that are set up and tasked with making sure that these rights of animals are being met and that these animals are being protected. So before you can do any kind of research with animals, you have to go to this board within the institution and make sure all the rules are being followed appropriately. And then there are check-ins on the animals as well. So this is not just an honor system for an ethics code. There are outside forces kind of governing this and making sure that these animals are being protected. So we're going to really focus on studying and protecting humans because obviously most of psychological research is done with humans. So both the APA and the BPS have ethics codes for humans as well, and both require participants to receive informed consent. That means that you have to know what you're getting into before you do it. So when you do any research here at the university as a part of your research participation credits, you will have to sign informed consent. If you're doing an online study, there'll be a digital form of that as well. But you will be informed of the risks of research, the risks of participation, and you will have to consent to those beforehand. For children under 18 or under 18, they are not legally able to sign an informed consent, so a parent has to do it. And so that's why our students that are under 18 aren't able to participate in the university research because we don't have a mechanism for their parents to sign their informed consent. The other thing that they both require is to protect participants from out of the ordinary harm or discomfort. So these are things that aren't normal to protect them from that. And even if there is kind of a harm or discomfort, they have to be properly informed of that. So when I was in grad school, I was doing a research study. My dissertation was on infants, and I was doing a research study with adults to have them rate the stimuli, these sounds and these videos that I was going to show the infants. So I was having them kind of an outside eye look at these things to make sure that they were what we said that they were. And it was a really boring study. And you just watch these like 200 like tiny videos, these tiny 1 second, 2 second videos. And you had to rate them on a scale of like 1 to 7. So I submitted my information to the governing body for human research, which is called IRB, that we'll talk about in a second. And it got kicked back. And they said, nope, you can't do it because your informed consent does not list boredom as a possible risk for participating in this research. So now, while boredom's not out of the ordinary harm, the research participants still had to be informed of that risk for harm or discomfort. So these institutions and these governing bodies take these things very seriously. That my boredom, that I was going to cause boredom for them, and that was a possible risk of participating. And so this informed consent and this protecting participants from harm and discomfort is a real thing that we're doing to make sure that our research is done ethically and equitably. We also need to make sure we keep information about participants confidential. So any information that is collected from participants has to be kept under lock and key. And their data has to be separated from their personal identifying information. So the personal identifying information has to be kept under lock and key, and then the data can be out, but there can't be any information linking that participant to their particular data. So this confidentiality is really important. So when you participate in research, you don't have to worry about anything that you do ever getting out in the world. So we know we're hyper concerned about that now with some of the issues of data mining and data sharing and all of that. The IRB, because of things like the American Psychological Association and the British Psychological Society, really you don't have to worry about that with them because this information is confidential, this is protected, it's removed. There's like one person per organization, like per lab that has a key. So this is very, very secure information. And we also have to fully debrief participants. So if we are doing a study that we don't want to tell them everything about the study beforehand in that informed consent, we will tell them afterwards. So we might not want to tell a participant, hey, we're really trying to see what you think about, how you're going to, this task is about altruism and about how nice you are to other people. Because if we tell you it's about how nice you are to other people ahead of time, you may act nicer than you normally would. So we might not tell you that at the beginning, but afterwards we're like, hey, this study was about how nice you are to other people, as a way to make sure that you know all the information of what you engaged in. We also have in your informed consent, there's information that says that you're able to stop the study at any time without any negative consequences for stopping the study. Because again, you are consenting to participate in this research, and so you are allowed to stop and revoke your consent. So the ways we make sure these things, these ethics are being maintained, again, we have these ethical principles and these code of conducts by various different societies and associations that govern psychologists. I already talked about this a little bit, the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board. Those are those group of people that kicked my research back and said, wait, you didn't tell the participants they might get bored. And so again, this is a very important governing body. It's other researchers, and so they're peer reviews, and it's an ethics committee for research with humans, and it's done at the institutional level. So if you're doing research at a university, there's an IRB for all human participants, not just psychological, but all human participants at the university. And so again, this really protects people and protects the participants to make sure things are being done safely and equitably, and making sure that people are being protected. Informed consent, we talked about that a little bit already. Debriefing, we talked about it, and we'll talk about them again a little bit more. And again, that confidentiality. So some of these ethical principles that we have one of them is the respect for persons, that people are autonomous creatures. And we need to make sure that we are allowing for that consent, that we are allowing someone to say, yes, I want to do this. No, I no longer want to do this. And having that autonomy in the situation of the researchers. There's no coercion. There's no compelling. There's no any of this. This is why in the research studies that are required for this class, there are alternatives offered. You can do a paper, here, you can go to a research conference, you can do a library session, because we cannot compel you to participate in research, because that is ethically wrong. That does not allow you autonomy in that situation. And so we have this respect for persons. We also have to remember with those with diminished autonomy deserve greater protection. So if you're doing research with any kind of special population, there's going to be additional safeguards placed in there. So if you're doing research with children, there's going to be additional safeguards put in place. If you're doing research with any kind of population that has some diminished autonomy for reasons of mental intellect, for other kinds of functioning issues, there's going to be additional protections placed on those people. And so that, again, that we're going to not only protect all people, but we're going to make sure people that don't have the ability to say, yes, I want to do this, or no, I don't, as well, to be able to have an extra layer of protection there. So with children's research, children can't sign consent forms, as we've said, but they can assent to participate in research. So if we're doing research with an infant, and mom or dad signed a consent form like, yeah, this baby can participate. Great, this sounds like fun. And you're doing the research with the baby, and the baby gets upset and starts to cry, you stop the research. Because while the parent consented to participate in that research, that baby did not assent to participate in that research. They dissented, right? They dissented, and they said, no, we're not going to do this. And so then you stop that research. And again, one of the ways that we apply this is informed consent. Another one that we look at is justice. So we're looking at justice. Who ought to receive the benefits and bear the burdens of research? So the benefits should be for everyone, and the burdens should be for few. And we shouldn't have any burdens without benefits. And so we need to make sure, again, we're picking participants equitably. And we need to make sure that we're picking them fairly. And so we can't pick participants that, again, are at-risk populations. We can't pick from participants that are coerced in any way. We can't pick from people exclusively who have less either rights or less support or less infrastructure to protect them. We have to make sure that we're picking participants fairly so that all people can benefit from the research, and that the burdens of research, whatever discomfort or minimal harm, is distributed fairly amongst all people. And so the way we do this is we make sure we select subjects fairly. In the past, this has not been something that that research was always great at doing, and we'll talk about examples of that later. And the last one is beneficence. So this is really kind of this Hippocratic oath of research. First, we're going to do no harm. So again, this is about that minimizing risk, minimizing harm, especially if this is something that's out of the ordinary. And then securing the participants' well-being. We're really trying to maximize the benefits of research and minimize risks. This is being done through a risk-benefit assessment that's being done both by the primary researchers, but then is also being assessed at that IRB level, at a different level with people that are not doing the research. We know that as humans, we kind of have some issues with objectivity, and so this is why that peer-reviewed ethics board is really, really important, because this is an objective board that can look at this and look at this risk-benefit assessment and make sure that participants are being protected, and that at first we're doing no harm, and that we're making sure we're protecting the rights of all of our autonomous participants. Now, again, unfortunately, a lot of these really great ethical rules have come out of mistakes of the past. So our ethical practices today are really a product of our ethical mistakes and our ethical atrocities in research's past and research's history. But when we know better, we do better. And so researchers are learning from their mistakes. Again, there are really horrible, terrible things that have been done in the name of research and the name of science. And so that's why these ethics are so important. That's one of the reasons that I want to talk about ethics before we talk about how you do the research, is because I want to make sure that we're looking at it through the lens of protecting participants. We're looking at it through the lens of respecting someone's autonomy. So we'll talk about methods in the next lecture, but again, I want to do it through this lens of research ethics. So again, we're learning from our mistakes. These are just a couple of the many mistakes that have been made. There's the terrible Tuskegee experiment that was done in Alabama, where African-American individuals were purposely infected with syphilis, and even after they knew that there was a cure for syphilis, did not give them the medication to cure it so that they could study the effects of this. So this was done in a not a respect for autonomy. They did not know what was happening. They did not consent to this. And so this is really a medical atrocity that was committed in the name of science. And there are links to the National Archive photos, which are very poignant and disturbing. But when we learn from our mistakes, they can be beneficial. So those are available on our supplements. And from the psychology researchers that we're actually going to talk about here in this class include things like the Milgram study, the Stanford Prison study, and the Little Albert study. Now, none of these were atrocities, but they did violate ethical rights. So in the Milgram study, people actually thought that they were hurting someone else, and that in some cases killed someone else. Think of the guilt and the pain that would inflict on you if you thought you had injured someone else. And we'll talk about that study in our social psychology chapter. The Stanford Prison study was another one. And again, we talk about that in our social chapter, where people were assigned to be either prison guards and these were college students at Stanford. They were assigned to be prison guards or they were assigned to be prisoners. And prison guards turned out to be really capable of harm to their fellow students who were considered quote unquote prisoners. And so we had harm done to these quote unquote prisoners, and we had psychological harm done to the guards, the quote-unquote guards. So that research study should never have been allowed to happen, but was cut off when they saw how much harm it was doing. Little Albert is a much older study. It was an infant who was conditioned to be scared of animals, and so that's causing harm, right? And this is something we'll talk about in our developmental chapter. So ethical practices are continually being discussed and refined for greater respect for both animals and people. And again, it's important for us to look at designing research through this lens. Look at how we ask questions with these factors, with these rules, with these principles in mind, because then we make sure we're protecting people every step of the way. Thanks so much.